I've tried to film this over and over again, and one thing or another has stopped me, largely my overconsumption of caffeine, and my dog keeps barking. But my sheer hatred is galvanizing me forward because I have a lot to say. Hi, it's Kendall here. New around here, welcome, not new around here. What is up, home skillet biscuit? And I watched Worst Ex Ever a few months back, a show that was basically people talking about their worst exes ever, but particularly a subtitle could have been, "You can do everything right and the police still won't help you." And when I uploaded that, people made me aware that the original series was Worst Roommate Ever, which I had vaguely remember seeing, but I hadn't watched because Exes just sounded juicier. But there's a reason they got a spinoff, because Worst Roommate Ever is a 2-season docuseries devoted entirely to hellish living situations. And I think another reason why I didn't watch it is because I've talked about this before, but there is something particularly up and triggering about the concept of a person making your house unlivable. It's a little trauma, but also just like that's so up. Your house is like your respite. It's where you should be safe. It's where you should sleep well. It's where you can be creative and make things your own. And then some comes to your house and decides this is mine now and doesn't pay rent, maybe steals your cat, and maybe, I don't know, tries to kill you. And it's still really hard to get them kicked out. So there's 2 seasons, like I said, and I've watched both. I watched them both in a very short amount of time. So I have a lot of frustrated energy. So I think I'm going to make 2 videos. This video will be on season 1. So I'm going to sit here and tell you all about it so that I can complain with an audience. And you guys can be with me and maybe complain, maybe tell your stories to help people along the way and not end up with a piece of shit roommate or just commiserate. I was about to say commiserate. What does that mean? Anyway, what I was saying was we can all commiserate in that way or just talk amongst ourselves about how terrible this show is because it pissed me off. It did. It also has a lot of the same attributes of Worst Ex Ever in that people will do the right thing and go to authorities and it don't mean shit. A lot of times it doesn't mean a damn thing until they've already like tried to kill you, like actively. But okay, until there's been an attempt on your life, you just have to tough it out. Be adults. Talk it over. So we're going to send it over to Admiral Kennie because Bill's, you know, the lot. Send it over. Thank you. Hello everyone, this is Admiral Kennie and today's video is sponsored by Classy, which is my new obsession because sometimes you just don't feel like putting on a bra. It just be like that. Sometimes it's an extra step, sometimes it is constricting, sometimes it just doesn't look good with the outfit that you're going for. And that, I found, has been solved by some of the products by Classy. They make clothes with the bra built in. They make tank tops, off the shoulders, long sleeve, tanks. They got stuff with the bra already built in. No longer do you have to look for a bra to match your outfit and make sure the straps don't show in the front or back. Also, they're like actually good bras. Sometimes the built-in bras and shirts are like trash, really, but these are actually like supportive. You know, I don't have the biggest girls in the world, but they nothing to laugh at, they nothing to scoff at, and they do a good job. But the thing that most impressed me was probably this off the shoulders top. If I wanted to wear this in any other context, I would either go braless, which honestly doesn't make me feel the most confident. Wear a bra with straps, which is just ugly because that's not what we were going for. Or I have to suffer passing out from air constriction wearing a strapless bra, which I'm just not going to do. So we're just not going to wear the top. But this has the bra inside. It's actually effective as a bra. And I don't have to worry about any of that stuff because it's built into the shirt. And if you would like to check out Classy, I have a link down below as well as a coupon code so that you can get 20% off. If you use code CLASSY948 for your first order. That's 20% off your first order if you use code CLASSY948 at checkout. Big thanks again to Classy Network for sponsoring today's video. Now let's get on to the debauchery. Okay, Worst Roommate Ever, season 1. It came out, if I'm not mistaken, in 2021 on Netflix, and it's devoted to people living with hell demons in their house. Again, there is nothing more frustrating to me than the concept of coming home, your safe haven, and just having a demon there, essentially. Like, that is truly horrifying to me, hellish even. And maybe the reason why I didn't watch this at first is because that concept is, I don't know what it is, but it hits me. it hits me here, you know? Like, sure, the piece of shit is supposed to be out in the world and you protect yourself out of the world, but not only are they in your house, they not paying rent, they cussing you out, and sometimes it's because they know that you can't, and so they'll treat you worse and worse, and you can't do shit about it. Like, that's some full-on A24 shit. The demon, the call was coming from in the house. That's why I could barely watch Mother. Before it even got to the eating baby thing, I was like, damn, this is triggering the out of me. Just people coming up in your house and they won't leave. Like, what the fuck? Call me grandma. This episode takes place in Sacramento in 1988. A woman by the name of Dorothea, who has a prominent status in the local area. She's a philanthropist. She gives to politicians, and she runs a home for the less fortunate, people who had fallen on hard times, people with mental illnesses, addictions, and they could come to her home and find respite. She would give them food, a place to lay their head, clothing, and all they would have to do is pay her a little bit from their Social Security checks. One of the people who would end up in her care is a man named Bert, who was originally from Costa Rica, and his family had moved to a southern state in the United States. They don't specify. And eventually he had kind of just drifted away from the rest of his family and ended up in Sacramento, where he would get a social worker. And the social worker recommended this very well-known and accredited, in the sense of like word of mouth, home for the less fortunate, people who had fallen on hard times, all that, right? At first, the social worker would notice that Bert seemed to be really thriving under Dorothea's care. He had things that he had ownership of now. He had his own TV and a recliner, and he got 3 square meals. He made friends, and he seemed to really be doing well. But after a few months, the social worker would go to check up on him, and he would be gone, just vanished. Dorothea would say that he had left to go on a trip to Mexico with his brother, and he would be back later, which the social workers found is strange, probably because there's not a lot of connection between him and his family anymore. So this concerned the social worker, and she would follow up a few days later asking about Bert. And when Dorothea said that he's just, he had left, the social worker insisted that this is a missing persons issue. Like, this man is not fully functioning and he just left, quote unquote. Something's wrong here. That man is missing. Later, the social worker received a call from some random man named Don, who said that Bert had come back home from Mexico, but had left out again and moved out officially. The son is playing peekaboo. Okay. And that he no longer lives at Dorothea's home anymore. Again, the social worker was like, that's fishy. I don't like that. So she ends up talking to one of the people staying at the house. She had met him in passing before at maybe one of the other care homes, and he had recognized her. And so she struck up conversation, and basically she said, is everything okay here? And he said, no, it's not. Bert didn't go to Mexico. Something's up with Dorothea. She's been, quote, digging a lot of holes. Okay. Now, Dorothea, as you will see on the screen somewhere, had quite the cover in that she was old as hell. Nobody thought that grandma, who had a box of kittens and opened her home to the less fortunate, had anything to do with the mysterious disappearance of a schizophrenic man. But if you look a little bit closer, you will find that Dorothea, she had a past of crime. She was convicted of forgery, running a brothel, prostitution, for drugging a man and stealing his belongings, lying about being a medical practitioner, and drugging and stealing from old women that way. And for a few of these felonies, she was sentenced to 5 years. While incarcerated, a man would come forth saying that Dorothea probably had something to do with the death of his mother, Ruth. Ruth and Dorothea were essentially roommates. They had tried to open a business together, and they had, done some business together that didn't go over very well. And she ended up in Dorothy's home to save money. And one day, Ruth's son would see her drinking, which was very strange for her. She did not drink. And she said, I've been very anxious, and Dorothea was kind enough to make me a drink to take the edge off. But within a few days, something was wrong with Ruth. She couldn't speak. She was like paralyzed. And when Ruth's son came to visit her, Dorothea was very opposed to him going to see his own mother, which is strange. He gets there and she's unwell, but he sees her. She's barely conscious. Her eyes are open. She's not speaking, and she's crying. I don't know why that hit me. Okay, wow. Something about the visual of that just me up a little bit. Anyway, but Ruth's son left her there saying that Dorothea had a past as a nurse. She had said she had a past as a nurse and assured her that she would be all right in her care. She would be dead by 6 o'clock the next morning. Dorothea said that Ruth had committed suicide. In her autopsy, it would show that she had a crazy amount of drugs in her system. And her son would immediately say Dorothea had been poisoning my mother. She had drained the joint account they had together when they were doing their business. And this, he believed, was the reason why he had her killed. So now Dorothea was on to running an illegal caretaking facility because due to her parole from the last felony, she was not able to run anything in caretaking because she impersonated a nurse. And this was all uncovered though when the social worker came looking for Bert. I don't know why everybody in the neighborhood would know her as a reputable place, but no police officers would say, can she run that? I think there was just some confusion about who she was because she had been married several times, had her name changed several times, and maybe they just didn't put together that this Dorothea was the same Dorothea that shouldn't be running a caretaking facility. But alas, eventually they put that together and a police officer comes to question her about all of this. Are you even allowed to run this facility? What's going on there? So the police officer comes over and questions the other people living there, and they all say this Mexico story that Bert had gone to Mexico with his brother, yada yada, and now he was off. But one man, the man that had said Dorothea had been digging a lot of holes, he would slip this man a piece of paper and say, Dorothea wants me to lie to you. I bet she does, bitch. The police officer would talk to that man and he says, something going on over here. People would be disappearing. I don't know what's going on over here. And a lot of people don't want to believe these people because they have mental illnesses or addiction problems. A lot of them are paranoid schizophrenics. So a lot of people kind of just like discredit it like, oh, maybe they just ran away. But at this time, Dorothea has to admit to this police officer that she's in violation of her parole because she's running a caretaking facility. Officers would also recognize that she had a bunch of blue pills scattered all over the home, and they would find out those are sleeping pills. And considering she had a background of drugging people and stealing from them, not a great sign. And so, with the suggestion of the man saying she digging a bunch of holes, a police officer says, would you mind us taking a dig in your backyard? And so she says, whatever for? He's like, yeah, just to check. She's like, okay, all right. So while digging, a police officer would say that she was just staring at them out of the window. And so they would dig and find a femur bone and eventually would find the remains of a second body. Now, technically, they can't say Dorothea killed and dug these people in the ground. So in this very small amount of time before they can say definitively that she did it, she said, I'm gonna go catch some coffee with a friend of mine and then it's on the run, bitch. Eventually, though, they would find the remains of 7 more people. 7 people. 7 people. My God. And they would also find some connection between the death of a man that had moved in with her a few years prior as a romantic interest and possibly the death of Ruth. If that weren't weird enough that the little old lady had 7 bodies in the backyard, what's also weird is that apparently she wasn't even as old as she said she was and was using this granny look as a cover. She looked like 75, 80. The bitch was 50. But they would eventually find Dorothea out on the run. She had left to Los Angeles and she would be taken in by a tip. And she was charged with 9 counts of first-degree murder. So that's the 7 bodies in the backyard, the one guy that came to live with her that they were dating or something, and then Ruth, right? So that's 9 people. Unfortunately, they were only ever able to fully get her for 3, but each of those got life in prison, so she wouldn't get more time, but it's the principle of it. These were people and she just threw them away, and come to find out the reason she did it was just to claim their social security. She would kill these people and keep raking in their social security checks, and because nobody knows that they're dead because these are people who were thrown away by their families, essentially. They didn't have close connections, they didn't have close friends, they didn't have network, and so know that they're missing. And so she would just continue to collect their social security forever. Oh my God. Evil bitch. And eventually the bitch died in prison. Good riddance. You, I hope you burn in hell. The next episode is called Be Careful of the Quiet Ones, an episode around the disappearance of Maribel Ramos. This episode starts on Craigslist, and as we will find, Craigslist is in many ways often a factor in a lot of these cases. Craigslist scares me. It has always scared me, but apparently it's very popular, or was very popular, for people to find roommates off of Craigslist. Terrifying. And maybe it's because of stories like these that cements that, and the Craigslist killer, and didn't Don't with cats. Didn't the victim meet the guy on Craigslist? I don't know. It just scares me. But she would need a roommate for her apartment, and she would find a man named Casey Joy. He seemed like a nice older man. He was moving from out of state, so he didn't have anywhere to stay, and he kind of was, just looking for a new place. And everything was going well the first few months, but Maribel did notice that he seemed quite lonely, right? He seemed very to himself. Again, he had moved from a different state, and she wanted to make the home and his life more welcoming there in Orange, California. So he became a bit more integrated into her family and to her friends, and he really became part of the family. Also, him and Maribel would become very close friends. Now, being that they're roommates, he was the first suspect that police looked into when she suddenly disappeared. He would come to the station willingly, but his alibi was essentially at the moment where she had gone off, he had taken a drive and just missed her, I guess. Which sounds suspicious as to me. I know that's just very convenient that he wasn't there the second she went missing. There wasn't any evidence necessarily to suggest he was outright lying, but there were a lot of scratches on his arm, which they questioned him about. Hey, where'd you get all these scratches from? And he would claim that he had got it while he was out fishing, and like there's a lot of thorns out in the area that he went, and the fishing line or something. It was very weird and vague, and his story could kind of be chalked up to him seemingly not being able to speak English very well. So maybe it made sense if he could articulate it well, but police would go search the area that he was talking about, and they said there were a lot of these like vicious thorns that could have very much given him those type of cuts. So then we talk a bit to Maribel's sister, who would claim that Casey had called her one day and told her that he was in love with Maribel, that he was the man for her, and that he intended to tell Maribel about his feelings. The sister was shocked and confused because he was a significantly older man. Maribel looked like she was maybe in her mid to late 20s, and this man was, in his 50s. He was older, and she just kind of told him straight up like, hey man, you're a great guy, you're part of the family. She will never see you like that though. And he seemed to just quietly accept it, but we are here. So Maribel's sister would go to her and say, hey, he told me this, he said these are his feelings. If these are the way he feels, that really up your living situation, you're gonna have to tell him to leave. He can't stay. But she's like, I'm sure it's not that big of a deal. I'll talk to him, and eventually would have a conversation with Casey saying like, oh, we had figured it out. He just had a crush on me and his feelings kind of got the best of him, but we're in a good place now. Don't worry about it. But it would seem like really quickly after that, Casey was just being weird. He was doing a lot of things that raised some eyebrows, made people go, what the hell? One, apparently Maribel had said in passing that he would look good with a tattoo, so he got a giant tattoo. He also spent like $10,000 on a bunch of facial surgery to look younger, started going out to bars and partying and being more like out and about, trying to be more hip, is the suspicion. And maybe because he spent $10,000 on his face, he couldn't pay rent. And so Maribel was like, hey, I paid your rent, which is something that she would not do. And she's like, you gotta start paying rent. I understand we're friends, but at the end of the day, you still gotta start paying rent. What the And apparently, when she came to him about the rent, he got irate. Absolutely weird, threatening, off the wall behavior, which is something that she had never seen from him before. So concerning that it led to her calling the police. She told them that she was scared. She told them that she had never seen the side of him. But above all, if I need to defend myself, I need y'all to know the situation that was up. Because if something happens, I gotta defend myself. Maribel was a veteran. She knew how to fight. She knew how to defend herself. So she was just saying like, hey, if I drop him, just so you know. As it became closer and closer to time for him to move out, their arguments would get more and more dramatic, I guess, to the extent that she was like, hey, I need your stuff out by tomorrow. And she calls a friend on speaker, a guy, and he says, if your shit ain't out, I'm coming over there personally to throw your shit out. And after that argument, Casey claims that he left for the night, and when he came back, she was gone. He would message her sister the next day claiming that he was worried she didn't come home last night. And the sister is like, I didn't think too much of it. She probably went out to have like drinks or something with a friend. Why are you being such a worrywart? After his whole confession thing, she thought he was getting like way too emotionally invested in like where she's going and yada yada yada. She's like, calm down. But eventually someone from Maribel's family would call the sister and say, hey, I don't want you to worry, but this like event, this thing that she was going to go to, I think it was a baseball game, she didn't come, and we're getting kind of worried, we're getting kind of nervous. That's when things started to click that Maribel was missing. With Casey, being the last person to have seen her, you know, we started researching him a little bit. He was acting strange in her disappearance. They would have a visual and he don't want to be near the visual. Like, oh, it hurts too much. And it's just like, does it hurt too much, or are you a murderer? You know what I mean? And so upon looking more into him, the police would also look into Casey Joy and would find out more about him. He would go on news and talk about like, oh, I just miss her so much. I want her to come home, in a very thick foreign accent, which was weird to Maribel's sister because that nigga spoke perfect English. What the what is that? Come to find out, was from Tennessee. He had left Tennessee after there was a lot of fallout for him there, particularly with his family. Police would actually end up calling his sister, and she would say that, and they would find out that she has a restraining order against him. She said he had ruined our family. He has a terrible temper, and I have a restraining order out on him. The pieces are coming together, but it's still not enough to really say he did anything because one, they can't find a body. Ma'am, you are being so selfish right now. Do you like food? Would you like me to be able to buy you food? Mommy gotta work. You better work. You better work. You better work. Very underrated Britney bop, in my opinion. Don't you start. They can walk outside. Now, he's very suspicious, obviously, but again, there's no concrete evidence that he did anything because one, they can't find a body. But they do start tracking Mr. Casey Joy, Mr. Joy, and there would be surveillance footage of him going to a local library and checking out one of their computers. On these computers, he would search things that were a little suspicious. For instance, how long does it take for a body to decompose? It raises an eyebrow, but you could justify it by saying like, I want to know how long it would take for people to find my friend. How long do we have to find her? But what probably didn't help was the fact that he had gone on Google Maps and satellite imaged a random tree on a dirt road, which, shocker, that is where they found Maribel's body. Unfortunately, they were never able to find out how she was killed. The general consensus is that he probably snuck up on her while she was sleeping. He was sentenced to 15 years to life. Why is that eligible for parole? I do not know. There is this like consensus that is probably around his feelings for Maribel and his like being a scorned man. I think that's bullshit. He was an angry, murderous man before this, hence why his own sister has a protection order against him. He was a piece of shit. That's why he did it. So there you go. Marathon Man. This sucks. They all suck. Okay, just to clarify. But this sucks in a way that is creatively bumbling, but also really disturbing. So first off, this man ruined a lot of people's lives all in the same like 5-month period. And spoiler, he may be out there still doing it now. We start this episode and we meet Callie, who at this time in 2011, she had just graduated college and she wanted to live in a different country. That was like her goal, to really experience another country, live there, work there, experience it. And she ended up moving to Chile. And she ended up finding a hostel, lived there with other foreign people who came to either study or to work or whatever. And she was able to meet people from all over the world. She made a friend very quickly, or I believe her name was Molly. She was also from the same state she was from, so they got along really quickly. And one of the people that lived at this guest house, essentially this hostel, was a man named Yusuf. Yusuf was Danish by nationality, but he was ethnically Palestinian, and he was very fit, seemingly was very into ultra marathons. Not even a marathon, ultra marathon. Is running longer than a marathon. Why do y'all do this to yourselves? That's neither here nor there. I don't like running a mile, let alone 40 or whatever the that's supposed to be. Oh my God. He would say that he was really interested in running the Chilean ultra marathon. He would regale the other housemates with these stories of heroism when he was back in the Danish special forces, and everyone seemed to really like him, right? And that's the thing that goes across everyone that we end up talking to about Yusuf. He was very likable, very personable, handsome, had really long eyelashes and real thick eyebrows. But it would seem that Callie was one of the few people that didn't buy his shtick very early. She thought he was full of shit. She was like, he just seems full of shit, seems not particularly authentic. And she let him know that. She was like, I think it's bullshit. And apparently that was a bit of a strain on their relationship because she was the only person that didn't subscribe to the cult of Yusuf of sorts. We then meet Maher, someone that Yusuf meets who's from Denmark. Maher was a part of the Palestinian network in Denmark, and their organization was essentially advocating for the humanization of Palestinians. There's a lot of news coverage about Palestine being just war and famine and just bad things, whereas their organization wanted to focus on Palestinians as artists and educators, humans, musicians, and sportsmen. So Yusuf reached out to the organization hoping to have them sponsor his run of the Brazilian ultra marathon. He said he's Palestinian and wanted to run on behalf of Palestine, and that he would need the equivalent of about 6,000 American dollars to do it. So Maher said he would help as best he can, and he was able to raise about a tenth of that, like not nearly what he wanted. Yusuf got very angry at Maher for that. He was like, I can't believe this, blah, really like very angry and agitated. And Maher was like, hey, you asking us for money. This is what we got. Either you take it or you leave it. And with that, Yusuf kind of calmed down a little bit, realized that you're kind of at their mercy, dude, if you're trying to get money from them. And he's like, I'm sorry, very apologetic. And he's able to put on this nice, soft face for Maher. Also, again, pulling at Maher's heartstrings by requesting a Palestinian flag that he could run with to bring good attention to Palestine. And Maher was very much so on board. Maher was following his race even online, where you could see like the standings of people. And at the end of the first day, it would show that Yusuf was number one. He was first place, which was so gratifying and exciting and made it feel like such a great win, not just for the organization, but for Palestinians, like in general. But that joy was quickly taken away because he would be disqualified the next day. Maher would call him up, be like, hey, what's going on? What's happening? What is happening? And Yusuf would say that he was told that he couldn't run because he had a leg injury. He told them, I can make it, I just need to stretch a little bit. And they said, no, you can't run, you're disqualified. He believes that because the doctors on the marathon were American, they had discriminated against him and not let him run because he's Palestinian. And being that Palestinians are subject to a lot of discrimination, Maher was like, I can believe that. Like, I can believe that. So he says, don't worry, sponsor me for my next race in Chile. He says, sponsor me for that. I'll run for Palestine. Even invites him to come down to Chile to watch him win, take pictures of him, and it would be great for the Palestinian community. Lo and behold, Maher gets there on the second day and he's been disqualified again. He's like, what the is going on? And he said they're the same doctors from the Brazilian race and they're discriminating against me again. Maher knew that was bullshit. They're raising money for this man to run these races and suddenly he's disqualified twice. Like, what is going on? One of the people who had raised money for him in Chile was a man named Carlos, also Palestinian ethnically, but he was living in Chile. He was able to raise money for the Chilean race. He thought well of him at first, but soon it was clear something ain't right with this man. We then meet a man named Dominic. I know you're like, wow, that's a lot of people. It all comes together, baby. Dominic is a British man who had met Yusuf at the Brazilian ultramarathon and had struck up conversation with him about investing in Brazilian real estate. Yusuf told him about the Chilean race, invited him to come out to that, and he was like, okay, sure. And as far as he could tell, Yusuf seemed trustworthy, so he decided to take a large sum of money to Chile for a down payment on real estate in cash. Okay. He then went back to London for some reason and gave it to Yusuf for safekeeping. They wrote a promissory note and he said it made sense. And I'm not trying to victim blame. All I'm saying is that would raise my eyebrow. Be like, huh? But again, they say he's real smooth and trustworthy seaman. So I don't know, baby. I don't know. Okay. So eventually he comes back to Yusuf, ready to get this real estate thing going. And Yusuf tells him that he has the money in safekeeping. And immediately Dominic was like, he on some bullshit, ain't he? I ain't getting that money back, am I? But one thing that would happen is that through Yusuf, Maher and Dominic would meet. And they would both share their suspicions of Yusuf with the running, with the raising of funds, and the real estate thing. And this is when they realized this nigga a pattern of swindling people out of their money. And so they get to researching and come to find out he was known all over Denmark for being a swindler. 50 people were claiming that he had scammed them out of money for a group trip to Dubai. He was wanted by police and charged with fraud in Denmark. And that was why he had suddenly needed to go to Brazil. He was on the run, and Chile on the run. So Meher contacts Carlos because he knows Carlos because that's how they raised money for the Chilean sponsorship, right? He let him know about the scams. And so they reach out to Yusef's sister. The sister is always coming clutch, I guess. And she says, I know he has ruined our family. He's a terrible person. He scammed so many people. But the worst thing to come out of this conversation, though, was when Meher is like, the Palestinian community put so much backing behind him. And she said, what do you mean the Palestinian community? And he said, what? She says, he's not Palestinian. He's Lebanese. What? Oh my God. I hate that nigga. I hate them all, but that's wild. He pulling, I just want to run from my country. You're Lebanese. So Carlos, I don't know the logistics of this because this don't really make sense to me, but Carlos convinces Dominic to come back to Chile and confront him about the money that he owes him. Yusef would agree to meet Dominic about the money. He was like, oh, let me show you the lawyer's office, so I can show you that it's legit. It would seem that this lawyer's office is on a deserted dirt road where Yusef tries to beat him in the head with a log, trying to bludgeon him to death. Luckily, Dominic is able to push him back in an act of last-ditch effort, desperate for survival, and they ended up fighting over the stick. When two passerbys see them fighting over a stick, oh shit, people just saw me. Don't tell anybody, please don't tell anybody. And Dominic was just rattled that he was almost a victim of murder, and he just goes home to London. So back to Callie, the girl at the beginning of this episode, right? She and her friend Molly are looking to move out because it's not good ventilation system, it's too ventilated and it's getting really cold in the area, whatever. She's looking to move to a new apartment. And Yusef says that he has been investing in the real estate of the area and has some apartments that are available to rent out. Despite Callie having some reservations about him and not really liking him very much, she did recognize that it would be much easier to move without knowing Spanish, without having all these things if somebody else just had the apartment. So out of convenience, she was like, okay, I'll just move into Yusef's apartments. Her and the friend would give him, a month and a half rent, the money down for the apartment. Yusef had also been borrowing money from the other housemates, and they started, wondering where that money is. And when Callie and her friend were trying to move, suddenly there's always a reason why they can't move. The apartment's not ready today for some reason, and today it's not ready either for this reason. Funny story, it's not ready today either. But one day he's like, okay, let me show you where the apartment is, Callie, and on the way back I'll give you the book bag with all the money for the rest of the roommates. I guess he was keeping it in safekeeping somewhere, of course, and she could just take it back to the house. So it's supposedly in this book bag, and that was the plan. He's going to show her where their apartment is, show her where she would pick up her key the next day, and she would take this money back to the housemates. But on that trek to the apartment, they were winding the roads a lot, to the extent that she was like, does he know where this shit is? He also would invite her to get drinks, which was news to her because she had never seen him drink before. And he drunk quite a little bit, she drunk quite a little bit, and she found herself starting to like him more as a person. She's like, oh, he's not so bad. Well, she somehow is convinced to go to a rundown, burned down building in search of a golden toilet seat. And when she gets there, he beats her over the head with a blunt object and tries to strangle her to death. She passes out, and when she wakes up, she is in a tightly wound tarp smelling nothing but motor oil, dirt, and ash. Luckily for her, she was able to free herself and head back to the hostel. When she gets there, apparently Yusef was talking to the other housemates like, oh my God, I'm so worried. Where is she? She's just gone. And apparently he was going to try to blame her for why no money was returned to the rest of the people and say she took our money and ran. You tried to kill her and then had the nerve to blame her for the money you stole. Whew. But luckily, she's able to make it back to the hostel. And as you'd imagine, she's pretty upset that he just tried to kill her. And he's like, why would you accuse me of that? Why would you accuse me of that? And her friend was like, you real concerned about her accusing you and not worried about what happened to her. Suddenly, Yusef is off, shocker, and they call the police. They look at her face and said, you ain't die, and do nothing. And so luckily, a local attorney in Chile hears of Callie's story and agrees to take on her case, trying to track down Yusuf before he can leave the country. Apparently he had lost his passport, and so they didn't have much time before he got a new one, and he was off to terrorize more people, apparently. With that said, they were able to charge him with attempted murder, and he was able to serve justice for 600 days. Okay. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm America pilled, but I definitely thought more than 2 years. That's less than 2 years for attempted murder is crazy, but okay. Anyway, he was let out, deported back to Denmark where he served some time for the crimes he had done there. And then he got out, and apparently last they had heard of him, he's in Costa Rica ruining more people's lives. He's probably under a different name these days, but that is still ruining people's lives as of 2018. Probably, I'm sure he's still doing it now. You don't just stop all of a sudden. You've been doing it your whole life. The last case of this season is called Roommate Wanted, part 1 and 2. This is the only episode from either season, as I believe, that has 2 parts. And I was curious as to why that is. And it's because of the sheer number of people this man had with their life. Like, I thought the last one was with a few people. So here we go. This is another episode that starts off on Craigslist, and a woman named Alex was looking for a roommate, and she would hit it off pretty well with a guy named Jed. He seemed responsible. He had a law background. At the time, he was moving from another state, so he wasn't practicing as a lawyer, but he was a tutor. He had a whole website for his tutoring, and it seemed pretty legit. He had a dog, and she had a dog as well, so she wanted them to meet, and they seemed to really like each other, and they hit it off pretty well very quickly, and he seemed to want to move in very quickly, like that night. Saying that he would love to move quickly because he's staying at an Airbnb and it's just draining his wallet. And so he moved in quickly. But when he got there, he had just a few bags, a few organization bins, the dog, but he also had a cat and a fish that she knew nothing about. This would have caused her pause because she's allergic to cats. So, but he's like, don't worry about it. She's very shy. You know, don't worry. You will never see her. Stuff like that. And so she would leave some paperwork from the management company that he would have to sign upon moving in. She noticed something was weird with him because he was taking his sweet ass time trying to sign them papers. Okay. And then just slowly but surely, she just noticed him doing weird shit. He just took all of the chairs to make a desk and chairs in his own room. She was like, I would like to have my chairs. And he's like, you don't need 6 chairs. It's 2 people. And she's like, but they're my chairs. Anyway, he let her have 2 of the chairs. And then things would be all well and good. Not really. But very quickly, that first month came around and he didn't pay rent. And so she's like, okay, what the f? He doesn't want to pay these bills. And so she goes and confronts him and she's like, okay, this is the Verizon bill. I'm expecting you to pay it. And he just like laughed in her face and was like, you'll see me in court. So being that was an escalation, Alex's mom was like, let me look up this dude. She's looking up his name, Jed, whatever. And she was like, I can't find this person. When she cross-references his number, she instead finds the name Jameson Bachman. That is his real name. His name is Jameson Bachman. And Jameson Bachman was known to be a serial squatter. He was so well known as a serial squatter that he had articles written about him and evidence of like a violent past with past roommates. And a problem is that, as he was obviously very well aware, once you start receiving mail at a residence, according to Philadelphia law, you can't move that person out without due process, even if they don't pay rent, even if you let them in under false pretenses. They have to undergo proper due process, and that process can take months. And Jameson was very familiar with that. He knew that he had a case and that they couldn't kick him out. Why? Because he had done this over and over and over again. Let's rewind a bit. 12 years to an ex-girlfriend of his named Arlene. Now, they would meet originally as friends, and then they would end up growing romantically and would date soon after that. They would break up and get back together because he had a bit of a temper. Now, one day he would move in with her because he had just gotten fired from his job and he was going to be homeless. And so she was like, okay, you can move in for a bit, but this isn't going to be for long. He comes in with his dog, and at the time she had 2 cats. She would get more cats over time. She was a cat person. And very soon she would notice him like rearranging her furniture. Like the first day he's rearranging her furniture. He would pay rent for maybe a month and a half and then suddenly, boom, stop paying. And again, she thought he was moving out, but he started getting mail delivered to the house. house. And that's when she's like, oh, this nigga ain't gonna leave. And so she goes to the police. And that's when she finds out what Alex found out. This is his house, technically. That's where he lives. And he knows it. He brazenly goes around like, this is my house. And before you know it, the days he was supposed to be there, maybe weeks, turns to months. Those months turn to years. Years. What do you mean, years? I had someone do this to me for 5 weeks. Within those 5 weeks, I wanted to end it all. No cap. Not trying to be dramatic. It was bad. Years? I would have just moved out. Like, she can have it. Well, I guess it's in my name, right? It's my lease, so I'd be credit-wise. Oh, God. But he didn't pay shit. He didn't do shit. If she went to him with a bill, he was like, he would tear it up and say, I'm not paying that shit. And he wouldn't just say that. He would get very belligerent. He would get in her face, violent, like aggravated, to the extent that she had to like slap him in the face to get him to back the up. And that's when he choked her. So she calls the police and said that he choked her up. But he had actually gone to the police first and gotten a protection order against her first, which confused me because I was like, how do you even stay in the same house with two people with protection orders? Apparently, she goes to the landlord who she has a good relationship with. And she's like, can you please come with me to like basically get an order of eviction for him? And you can testify essentially on my behalf that he's the issue here. But before that can get settled, she's arrested because Mr. Jameson had lied to police and said that she attacked him with a knife. And because he already had a protection order against her first, they gave her 1 year probation. Yes, she got charged. 1 year probation and told her that she had to move out because he did the first protection order. So she had to move without her cats, 2 of which were very ill. And when she was finally able to get her cats back, she was able to get a court order to get her cats back. He had sent them both, 2 of them at least, to a kill shelter, one of which she couldn't save. They were already too bad. They were ill. And one she was able to get back, and he just kept her other 2 cats. Now that Arlene was kicked out, he would now start kicking off with the landlord, which is hilarious because what? You don't even live there. Your name ain't even on the lease. What the He didn't pay rent, so he still wasn't paying rent, by the way, even though it's now his apartment technically. And he would like beat a log on the floor to annoy downstairs tenants. He would keep the water running 24/7 to raise the landlord's water bill, but he knew the law, so they couldn't just kick him out. And he was there for at least another year and took her cats when he left. We eventually meet Bob, who I think is supposed to give a bit of a humanizing side to Jameson because he's a childhood friend. Bob has a very complicated relationship with Jameson because that was his close friend, and to see what he turned into and the terrible things that he had done, he can't excuse them, but being that he like witnessed the life, the situation that he grew up in, it's hard to think of him entirely as a villain. Luckily for me, I don't have that problem. That nigga. But I digress. He's like, we were childhood friends, and I always knew that he had a rough home life. His father in particular was an animal, quote unquote, as his mother would describe him. He was a nice kid growing up, according to Bob, popular and confident. It was pretty apparent he was going to do great things. He would go to law school, and everybody could kind of bet on him to do something great. When he would run into him again, Bob would run into Jameson again a few years later, you could see that he had changed. At this point, he was at college, and come to find out, he was stalled and dark. And apparently the trigger for that and what kind of changed him was that he had seen a murder at a frat party he had gone to. And Bob thinks that may be what kind of pushed him over the line. The person that was killed was his friend, and he saw him attacked with a meat cleaver. So yeah, that'll definitely leave a mark. I really wish, I'm not saying it has nothing to do with it, but I don't see how they're connected. I don't see how squatting at people's houses is the same as like PTSD trauma, but maybe it is. I'm no professional. Then we meet Sonia, the woman that he would live with after Arlene. Sonia had used her pension to buy a condo, and it was her dream to own it. It was her dream home. She had lived there with her partner of 10 years, but their relationship would end and that partner would move out. And so she needed to find a roommate. She goes on Craigslist and she, sees Jameson. He's a lawyer. He's respectable and he's very clean cut. And, immediately she was like, oh, he seems like a cool guy. He moved in very quickly. He paid cash, which made her uncomfortable, but she was like, I was in such bad financial situations that maybe this is just a blessing. Don't look the gift horse in the mouth type thing. She was about to lose her home. So she was just very grateful to have someone move in so quickly. And the first few months were great. And then he stopped paying rent. She goes to him and she's like, hey, if you don't start paying rent, I'm gonna have to take legal action. And that's when he would start having a bunch of excuses about how he can't pay rent. And then Sonia was like, I'm going to have to kick him out. And she would be told, he gets mail there, he can't move out. Not until you do the very long months and months long process of due process. Now, again, she's in a financial bind. That's why she got a roommate. So if he's not going to pay, she was like, because of him, I have to move another person into this home and she's going to live in a tent in the living room. This woman comes with 2 dogs, and Jameson had a dog and 2 cats. So that's 3 dogs and 2 cats, math, in a room in a very small condo. It was getting crowded. It was getting bad. And one day while she's at work, she's taking up all these extra hours trying to pay for her home. And one day she gets a call from the woman who was renting out her living room. And she's like, Jameson's being very scary. He's berating me. He's like yelling at me. She also had evidence that he had been going in her room, in her tent, but in her space. And he was belligerent and she was afraid that he was going to do something to her or her dogs. And so she left. Fuck. Eventually, he was served eviction papers, but even when you're served eviction, you still have a time frame before you have to move out. So during that time, he would start verbally harassing her, threatening to take her home. She would find evidence that he was going in her room as well. And so she would confront him like, hey, you can't come into my room. He would get so mad that his face would turn red and he would start screaming. She had a history of practicing self-defense classes because a friend of hers was actually murdered. And so that inspired her to really try to empower herself and learn how to defend herself. And she was like, I could him up. And she was like, you're not worth my breath. I'm going to church. And she just left him there mad. She would leave the home for a few weeks to stay with her mother during Hurricane Sandy. And apparently that was also the time they were supposed to have their court hearing about the apartment and him leaving. But when she came back, he was gone. He had taken all his stuff. But at that point, because Jameson hadn't paid for so long, she could not recover. And she lost her dream home to foreclosure. That shit broke my heart. I'm like, what the dude? Oh my God. Back to Alex, right? The first woman that he was treating like shit. They had just found out that his name is not Jed. His name is Jameson, and he has a history of squatting in houses. And so she said, if he won't leave, I am going to annoy him to death, which is very funny. Very Doctor Strange of you. I'm working my way through the MCU, so pardon me if I make like 20-year-old references, 10, 15-year-old references. I stand by it. I think it's funny. Anyway, but she's like, I'm going to annoy him to death. I found out things that he don't like and I'm going to do all of them. He don't like smoking. He don't like drinking. He don't like rap music. And I'm a Wu-Tang girl. So I'm going to throw a party. So she does. She invites 20, 30 of her friends. How do you know so many people? Anyway, she invited 20, 30 of her friends to have a very loud drinking Jameson specifically, playing rap music real loud. And we're going to party every day if necessary to annoy this to death. We talked about him loudly. We also pasted news clippings of him serial squatting in other people's houses, having that all around. That's very funny. That's hilariously petty. That's funny. He would leave the house a bit to get away from the party with his dog. And when he came back, they had removed his doorknob. So that he couldn't lock his door. The next morning, after the party had ended, she is brushing her teeth very early in the morning and gloating about like, oh, you couldn't sleep very well last night, because she heard him get up. And so she starts to taunt him like, oh, you couldn't get much sleep last night. And he comes in and tries to choke her and said very jokerly, you've made a grave mistake, you stupid little girl. What in the Gotham? He lets her go, but she a bit of a hothead herself. And so she runs in there, busts into his room and said, what did you say to me? She catches him feeding his cat with like a small paring knife, probably pate or something. And he rushes the door and slams her leg into the door several times and cuts her. She's able to get away and call the police. And they see the wounds like on her neck and the scratches on her legs and stuff like that. And so they arrest him for assault. And because of these wounds, she was able to get a protection order with eviction. You shouldn't need to get choked out to get an eviction, but okay. So he's in jail. She starts packing his shit up really quickly. And that's when she finds a bunch of evidence of his legal papers of the other people he had squatted with, as well as a gun case, sans gun. So that's scary. Where is the gun? Back to Bob, the childhood friend. And he says that after like 30 years of not talking to him, he would randomly reach out to him on Facebook and try to get reconnected. And they would get along really well, like the good old times. But Jameson would tell him stories about how he kept meeting these crazy women as roommates and how it was was always their fault. And he's like, how does this keep happening to me? Bob would also touch on Jameson's relationship with his brother, Harry. He would kind of talk about how Harry was the more successful one. And apparently Jameson's father had said outright that he had bet on the wrong horse, Jameson, and lost. That's fucked. Basically saying how he never met their grand expectations and they were really disappointed by who he had become in general. And I'd imagine that perhaps lingered into their uncomfortable feelings, bleeding into their relationship, probably with some jealousy. But despite that being the case, when Jameson was sent to jail, the person that bailed him out was Harry, much to the concern of Alex. He hated her. There was a gun missing somewhere and now he's out on the loose. So her mom was telling her to leave the apartment, move out. And she was like, I'm not going to do it. And besides, I'm about to get kicked out anyway because my landlord won't renew my lease because of everything that had gone on with Jameson. All the drama with Jameson. That's f***ed up. Not only did he ruin your f***ing life, now he's gone and you're getting kicked out of the apartment. That's wild. Anyway, I assume she's court mandated to return his things though. And so they decide to do that at a distance at a police station. And she gives him everything except his dog because she gave it to a friend to adopt. Karma's a bitch, ain't it? And so because of that, he yells at her that she's a dead bitch. You're dead. In the parking lot of the police precinct, which is probably not the best idea. I'm sure they were at a distance, but he came closer to do that, which is breaking the protection order. And so he's in violation and she got him back in jail for violating parole. And guess who got him out again? Harry, his brother. Now, after bailing him out twice, Jameson is still very upset. Just angry overall, but seemingly very angry at Harry of all people. He seemed like very sad and depressed and he would kind of talk about this to Bob, the childhood friend that he was trying to keep in touch with. He was very depressed and was saying some pretty alarming things to Bob. Apparently his cat had died, which if you recall, wasn't his cat. It was Arlene's cat that he just took from her. And Bob sometimes wonders if he killed the cat. He's like, I don't know, but I wonder. And with all these things going on and all the people that he had threatened and all the people he swore up and down did him wrong, the person that he ends up murdering is his brother, the one who got him out of jail twice. Not that I'm saying that he should have killed anybody else. He shouldn't have killed his brother either, but it's just something this wild. The amount of people you threatened to kill and the one that you did kill, the one that tried to help you. Honestly, that shouldn't have been trying to help you. You were a lost cause for a minute there. Incredible. But he was arrested, but not before he swung a axe at police officers trying to take him in, one of which he struck in the face and the other in the arm. But surprisingly, they didn't have to shoot him to take him in. Wild how that goes, eh? But you're afraid of kids with Skittles. I swear to God. Anyway, they lock him up. He was gonna go on trial, but he ended up prior to that. So there's Jameson, very troubled and demented man who over a lot of people. Jameson sucks and he died. And like a final F you to the people that have tried to make him take accountability for anything. And good riddance. He ruined a lot of people's lives. He murdered a perfectly innocent man as far as, well, he was a person. He was a father. He was a husband. He was just a guy. And as usual, men will commit murder before going to therapy. Alas. That's season 1. It's already dark. I've been sitting here talking for hours. Season 1. We'll come back and talk about season 2. Did you guys watch Worst Roommate Ever? I'm curious. Or Worst Ex Ever? Want to hear your opinions? Do you have any like horror stories with roommates? I've heard a lot of horror stories about college roommates in particular. If you like this video, feel free to like this video. Follow me on all my social media, Instagram and Bluesky, both of which are KennieJD. Thank you for everyone that has applied to be my editor. I am no longer looking for people, I think, at this time. But, you know, I'll keep your names and everything if I need to get more people in the future. So thank you, everyone. And I will see you guys next time. And I think my period just started because I just felt a cramp in my coochie. Bye.